I'm Phyllis Lerro. I am the grandmother of Mason Lerro, also known as Miracle Mason. Mason's story for me began his fight for life and the story of his spirit and of his will begins with the pregnancy. Aaron and Jackie hadn't been married just real long when they found out they were pregnant. They were both in the Air Force at the time. They were stationed in Germany. That's where they had met. Everything seemed fine. They just, were enjoying the fact that they were going to be having a baby and making plans. And Aaron was making plans for being Mason's soccer coach. They named him pretty quickly, so we knew he was Mason from pretty early on. So everything was going along pretty well until about the middle part of the pregnancy when they do the anatomy scans. And when they did those, they found that he had his femurs were really short, and also that his chest, his rib cage, was bell-shaped, is what they would call it. And we found out later that bell-shaped is kind of one of those indicators. And so they were immediately told, once the scans were seen, that Mason had all the characteristics of achondrogenesis and that he would not survive birth, that the best thing they could do really was just to terminate the pregnancy, and really started encouraging them to do that. They were not willing to even consider terminating the pregnancy. Mason was very active. He was obviously alive. They had already developed a relationship with him. It just was not going to happen. So the doctors then did insist that they do an amniocentesis just to confirm the diagnosis of achondrogenesis. So they really didn't feel like they were given a choice for that, so they went ahead and did it. They left there very upset and scared and worried and disappointed and just all the things. Aaron and Jackie did go through the amniocentesis. They were allowed to follow up with a specialist. And this specialist happened to be an American doctor. I think he was a military doctor. They went to one of the larger bases to see him. And so he saw them. He looked at the scans and everything. And right about this time, they got the results back from the amniocentesis ruling out achondrogenesis. And so the specialist, the American specialist, looked at all the scans and all of that, and he said that he thought that it was hypochondrogenesis. It's funny because even though the amniocentesis ruled out achondrogenesis, the original doctors said, that's fine that it ruled it out, but it doesn't change anything. This child is not going to survive. And, your best bet, every visit, your best bet is to terminate this pregnancy. And so every time they went to the doctor to, see the people who were supposed to be helping them bring this child into the world, what they got was, you really need to be ending this child's life. And so it was a really hard time for them. They were told that Mason probably would not survive to be born, and that if he was born, he would live maybe 5 minutes. Aaron was told 15 minutes if you're lucky is what you'll have with him. But they really did not expect him to even make it to birth. And so you've got a mom who is more than halfway through her pregnancy in a foreign country. They're very young. They were about 23 years old when this was happening. And you're carrying this child who is active, and you see the 3D ultrasounds, and he's making faces and sucking his thumb and all of this, and just dealing with that whole situation of not knowing. You've really been given no hope whatsoever. And they even indicated, even if you give him all the support that is available, he's not gonna survive. So we all as a family started to just try to come to grips with this. You know, you start thinking, I can't believe we are one of those families that is going to deal with this unimaginable situation. And it feels like you're in a movie or something. It's just not even, it's just so far outside of what you were expecting. And it is one of the most surreal things I've ever been through. And I can't even imagine from Aaron and Jackie's side going through this at that time. Very, very hard. And so you know, while most expectant families are, you know, having baby showers and buying car seats and picking out strollers and all of that sort of thing, they really didn't know whether they should do anything or not. It's a really strange place to be in. And as the grandmother, I went ahead and I bought stuff for the baby. I was like, I'm gonna have hope, but I'm also gonna accept whatever happens. You know, our prayer all along was, let them be wrong. We just prayed, let them be wrong. We just wanted them to be wrong. So Aaron and Jackie had been in Germany about 3 years, and their time there was coming to an end. And so they actually were transitioned from Germany to the States in November of 2013, and Mason was due in December 2013. So when Aaron and Jackie got transitioned back to the States, they were going to be in the Missouri/Kansas City area, and they were assigned a new perinatologist. And he really took great compassion on them and the situation. And he was really looking for signs that maybe the previous doctors had been wrong. He wanted them to be wrong too. He was really hoping he could find something to give them a little bit of hope. And so he told them, I'm gonna personally redo all of the scans and the tests myself. And he did. He personally conducted the ultrasounds and everything. And he told them, he said, Mason's chest, his rib cage is really, really small. He said, I do see lung tissue, but it's, you know, the heart takes up the most space, and there's just not a lot of space in there. So his lungs are going to be tiny, tiny. And so he said, I've seen smaller chests before, but he said Mason's is really small. And so he said, I'm gonna give him about a 50-50 chance. And to us, a 50-50 chance was like incredible. It was like a new breath of hope came through, because he was giving Mason a 50-50 chance. Of course, you know, you realize a 50-50 chance is a really safe bet, but it was just so much better than the chances that he'd been given before. And so we kind of held on to that, and we continued to pray that there would be changes. And he did regular, you know, checks on her and regular checks on Mason. And one of the things he had found in some of his examinations was that Mason had what he thought was an aortic arch interruption. That's a heart issue. And this is a perinatologist. This is a God story here. This is a perinatologist who, one of his areas of expertise was the fetal heart. And so he really knew what he was looking at. And he had said that he found that Mason had an aortic arch interruption, and that's something that would have to be repaired immediately after Mason was born. He said Mason will be born, they'll get him stabilized, and then they're going to take him right across the street to the Children's Hospital, where he could have surgery to repair this aortic arch interruption. So it was a pretty certain thing that he was supposed to have surgery right after he was born. We just kind of went on. They kind of just went on, holding on to the, you know, not knowing to plan for Mason, to to be born, to plan for him. We kind of assumed by that point that he would make it to the birth. We just didn't know what was going to happen after that. And so, you just live in this limbo. And we finally got to the date that they had set to do a C-section. We all went to the hospital. I remember sitting in the room with Jackie when the social work, probably the nurse educator, comes through, doing her speech about, when you take your baby home, make sure that you don't let your baby sleep with you in the bed, and just the routine things. And the whole time she was saying that, I just remember thinking, none of this applies. None of this is going to apply to our situation. And poor Jackie, we didn't even have a car seat with us because nobody knew. There had been no baby showers. There had been no real preparations. There wasn't a nursery at home. She didn't know what to do. As the grandmother, I had to get a couple outfits. I mean, it's just kind of in the grandmother handbook. You do that. And so I had done that, but it was a very, very strange, surreal place to be. They took her back for the C-section. Aaron went with her. They did the C-section. They got Mason out. Apparently, from what I understand from Aaron, I think he cried 1 second, just real quick, and then nothing. And so they knew they were going to have to intubate him. They were fully prepared to give him all the support in the world. And so they did. They just knew they were going to have to intubate him. So pretty quickly, right off the bat, they took him back. They intubated him and, got him as stable as they could. His lungs were so tiny. He was, I think he was about 13 and a half inches long. He weighed 6 pounds and some odd ounces, but he was 13 and a half inches long. He was the teeny tiniest little thing. And had a head full of black hair, and so they got him as stable as they felt like they could. And they allowed us to come back into his NICU room where they had him, and he was all hooked up to stuff, and he was in the little incubator / bed thing that they have. And so we were allowed to kind of be back there. It was Aaron and myself, and Jackie was still being tended to because it was a C-section. And I just remember thinking, okay, when are they gonna take him off for his surgery? When are they gonna do that? Because they need to be on the ball, and he's got to have surgery on his heart. And so we kind of watched and waited. There was at one point something happened, and he obviously it's like something got blocked the tube or something where they had intubated him, and he struggled for a moment, and the doctor came, flipped him around, took the tube out, re-intubated him real quick. Something had happened with that tube. And so that was a little bit of a scary moment, but I kept telling Aaron, I said, I have another daughter-in-law named Ashley, and she's a NICU nurse. And I kept telling Aaron, now Ashley says not to panic. They'll tell us if there's anything to worry about. They see this kind of stuff all the time. And on the inside, I'm going, oh my goodness, what in the world is going on? It was so scary. But we stayed really calm. They re-intubated Mason, got him back to stable. I had no idea what any of the numbers on those monitors meant. I would come to learn lots and lots about the numbers on those monitors. We became pretty much experts on those monitors and what those numbers meant. And I became a very dedicated number watcher. When I would be with Mason, I'd be watching those monitors all the time. But they got him stabilized, and I kept thinking, when are they going to come and do his surgery? And it wasn't long that all of a sudden we started hearing them say, he's not going to have surgery. He doesn't have an aortic arch interruption. And we were like, I remember going, what? What did you say? What? And they said he does not have an aortic arch interruption. That was the first big God moment in Mason's life. That was a huge thing to me. That was God saying, I'm not through with this situation yet. We've still got some things to do here. He had made it past the 15 minutes that Aaron was promised that he would not make it past. And then he made it 30 minutes. And then he had made it an hour. And then another hour went by. And all of a sudden we're going, okay, he's still hanging in there. His life from that point for the next several months was really kind of a limbo. Nobody knew if he was going to survive or not still. He had survived birth, but nobody knew what was going to happen. The doctors didn't dare try to even say what they thought was going to happen. They just didn't know. They were just looking to Mason to see what was going to happen. So during that time, we started everybody, it was like living in a limbo. It was like being in a fog that was like the horror movie type fog, where it's so thick that you cannot see 2 feet ahead of you. You did not know what was in front of you. You only knew what was behind you. You didn't know if your next step was going to take you off a cliff, or if it's going to open up to a green meadow. It was that sort of a situation. We just did not know. So we had to really learn to exist in the moment and show up every day. He was there. He was present. He knew that we were there. He would look. We would hold books up for him to we would read to him and point, and he would follow what you were looking at. He would track stuff. It was amazing because honestly, I wasn't sure he would be able to do anything. I really thought maybe he would be a vegetable with everything that you read and stuff about the things that they were saying were going to be wrong with him. And so it was amazing from the very beginning that he really was just a typical little baby. His issues that he had were the pulmonary hypertension, tiny lungs with super high pressures. He had a cleft palate, the dwarfism, obviously, were the really, really short arms and legs. His airway, he had a floppy airway is what they call it, tracheomalacia. As we went along, it became evident that he was going to stay on the ventilator. He was not going to be able to come off of that ventilator. So they started talking about doing a trach. And so they decided they would do a tracheostomy and a G-tube placement all in one day. 2 different doctors. The ENT was going to do the trach first, and then the GI doctor was going to do the G-tube. And so it was a little bit upsetting. A trach seems kind of permanent, and that's just as kind of a scary thing. It's just you got your little baby there, and he's going to have a trach. It takes some adjustment time, but we realized that this was the way that was going to help him. This was the thing that was going to help him most. He needed that trach because this was going to be a longer term situation for him. So they went in, they started the surgery. The ENT doctor came back really quick after starting the surgery and actually said, "I don't have good news." He said, I wasn't able to do the trach. He said his airway, Mason's airway, was so tricky that he couldn't get it. And he said not only that, because the airway was so tricky, he was even afraid to even change out the tube, because these tubes that people are intubated with typically only last at the most a couple of weeks at the most. And so he was, had thought, well, at least change out the tube. But he said, I was afraid that if I took that tube out, I wouldn't get it back in. So he left the tube in there, and he said, all I can think of is that we wait a little while and maybe try it again later. And so that was kind of a hard day, because the thing that was giving us hope for the future was Mason getting this trach. He wasn't able to get it. The G-tube went in just fine, so that was good, but we immediately started realizing it was not, Mason was really hanging by a string at this point. He was intubated by mouth, which you just don't typically stay intubated by mouth for that long. If you're going to be intubated by mouth for that long, they usually switch you to a trach. So the doctors there were very wise, and they started putting out feelers. They started looking to other hospitals and reaching out to people, trying to find a hospital that thought they might be able to do a trach for Mason. Ended up, this was a bit of a process. It wasn't just an overnight thing. But they ended up finding a doctor who said, a pulmonologist who said, I believe we can help him. And this pulmonologist was at Nationwide Children's Hospital in Columbus, Ohio. And she just said, all she had to say, some of the others had said, no, we don't think we can help this child. But she had said, I think we can get a trach in him. And that was, just music to our ears. So we started the process. It was a long process. Aaron had to get approved for a transfer with the Air Force. The insurance had to approve it. We had to get Mason there. Mason, who couldn't get his diaper changed without having a blue spell, was going to have to get on an airplane and fly from Kansas City to Columbus, Ohio. So it really seemed insurmountable, and at first the insurance said no, and then at the last minute the insurance said yes, and it was just, again, things just came together. God had a plan, and so at the end of the day got approved. They put Mason on an airplane with a whole entourage of people. The President of the United States does not have the size entourage as Mason had the day that they transferred him by plane to Columbus, Ohio. So they took him to the new hospital. It was a huge hospital. It was a huge children's hospital. Nationwide it's humongous. The staff there began getting to know him, and they started figuring out what they could do about getting a trach for him. A few months had gone by now. This was probably about April. They had done all the preparation. They had learned everything they could about his anatomy and his throat, and they thought they could do it. They were going to give it a try, and so they, sure enough, did the surgery. They did it successfully. He got his trach. And so it was just an awesome day. The ENT surgeon, this is the other God thing, and one other God thing. The ENT surgeon, we asked her to keep, we told her that we wanted to keep the tube that Mason, his intubation tube, the air tube. And so I think she kind of thought that was funny, but she did. She let us keep the tube, and we explained to her that we had a love-hate relationship with this tube. We hated that he had to have this tube in his mouth all the time, but it was the very thing that kept him alive. And it had been the same tube from the day he was born till about 4 months. It had been over 3 months for sure, middle of December to sometime in April. And she was amazed that it had been the same tube. She thought we had been mistaken. And when we explained to her, no, we aren't mistaken. He has had that same tube since the day he was born. She was amazed, because that just doesn't happen. There were a few people that we ran across during his time in the hospital that really didn't seem to buy in that he could have any sort of life. One day in his room, when Aaron and Jackie weren't there, I was there relieving them. A couple of them were just talking with me. They didn't really know Mason very well yet, and they were both kind of like, they were just expressing, I just don't see how he's going to have any quality of life at all. And how fair is that to him? And things like that. And I had the conversation with them. And when they left, I talked to the doctor that was kind of in charge that week. And I just said, if people aren't on Team Mason, they don't need to be coming in this room. I don't want to have any more conversations like that with people. Those are some of the things that we have dealt with especially in the early days. Once Mason got out of the hospital, we didn't have too much of that anymore. But, lots of ups and downs in the hospital. He had his trach surgery was his was really his second surgery. A month or so later, maybe a month or two later, they enlarged one side of his chest using a fantastic procedure that they have there at Nationwide. Then after a certain amount of time, they enlarged the other side. It made his lungs started growing. There was more room for them. So they started growing, they started working better, he started improving. But the doctors, they were still really negative about him going home. It's like that wasn't even an option. And so we would have regular meetings with the whole team. And one day I remember, after like 6 months or more, you're just really starting to wonder, are we ever going to get out of here? And so we would have regular meetings with the team. And one day we just expressed to them that we wanted them focused on getting Mason home. And that's what we wanted. We wanted to see steps made toward Mason getting home. And we even said, we realize that Mason is fragile. We realize he could die. If he's going to do that, we would rather him do that at home than here. And so something about that was the magic words. And so they agreed to start with realizing that we understood the severity of the situation. They started moving him toward going home. Right before he went home from the hospital, they had done some sort of brain scan where they're looking to see what parts of the brain are active and what parts are not. And basically, after that scan, they told Jackie that he would pretty much be a vegetable. They said he would not see, he would not be able to hear, he would not have voluntary movements of his arms and legs, so he wouldn't be able to control his body at all. He would be nonverbal. He would, he basically really made it sound like he was going to just be a vegetable. And it just tore her up, because we could see things. We could see him doing things. We could see him making progress. And then, for them to, see what they saw, and they go by the black and white, and they don't necessarily factor in hope and prayer and all of that. And so they told her what they saw, and it was so discouraging. But once he got home from the hospital, he just took off. He thrived. He did so well. He was just barely over 10 months old. So he'd been in the hospital nonstop for 10 months. And so he went home in an ambulance. It was just a big, big deal. And so after he got home, he started to thrive. He got physical therapy. He started doing better and better. He started getting stronger and stronger. He just inspired people. A lot of our friends already believed in prayer, but boy, he just validated our belief in prayer. For a kid like him who had a lot of struggles, to be able to smile like he could, it's just awesome. He was really very healthy. There were very few times that he got sick. He was just a tough little fella. so tough, and he would he had learned to get around. He would sign more. He would try to say more. He loved his bubble machine. Bubbles were the light of his life. Bubbles and Dum Dum Suckers were the light of his life. He would climb mountains for a Dum Dum Sucker, and they used it in his physical therapy all the time. And there's some of the cutest video of him crawling to get to the Dum Dum Sucker, and she keeps moving it away, and he's gonna get that Dum Dum Sucker. And but he, he just was. He was just a wonderful, inspiring, story, and definitely a God story. He was just really awesome. Such an honor to be his grandmother, and even today, people still just are still influenced by him. By the family and the way Aaron and Jackie handled him. They were so good and so capable of providing all of his overwhelming needs. I learned that God is trustworthy, for one thing. I never once, I always kept telling myself, nobody loves Mason more than God does. As much as we love him, God loves him more. And I trusted that, and we trusted that, and we rested right there. That's where we rested. We didn't really know what was happening. We didn't know what was going to happen, but we knew that in the moment, Mason was there. Somebody needed to minister to him. He was just like any other child. He needed to be loved and ministered to, and that's what we did. And that child never knew anything except for what it was like to be loved. All he knew was love. He never experienced anything other than that. Everybody in his life valued him. He was the jewel. We just, and what a gift that was. What a quality of life. When you're judging quality of life, you just can't always judge from the exteriors. There's so many other things to look at. And Mason's quality of life was awesome. And but we learned that God he's still good. He's still God, and he's still good. And we trusted him, and we still do trust him. And life is sacred, and every single life is valuable. It's very lonely to be in this situation with a child as medically fragile and severely disabled as Mason was. And so I love kind of joining arms with others who are going through it now. Our journey with Mason is over, but other families they're doing the hard stuff now, and they may be doing it for a very long time. And so I love knowing that we can come alongside them, support them, help them financially. There are so many expenses and things associated with having a child like this, and so it's a financial burden, and even when you're eligible for benefits and if you're eligible for services, it never covers it all. There's always something else that the child or family needs because of it just affects everything. So yeah, we're just really, really glad to be able to be emotional support, give some financial support, what little it may help. We're just so glad to be able to do that through the scholarship.